Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about some Week 8 waiver wire pickups.
Hike!
Hard to believe, Joe, we're entering into the halfway point of the fantasy football regular season, so things are starting to get a little interesting here, Joe. Let's talk about our first pickup here. That's going to be wide receiver Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. We just talked about him in our most recent episode where we talked about some ramifications of the Amari Cooper trade and him now going to Buffalo. Well, now he is in the starting position. So he had 69 snaps, 47 routes run, 11 targets, Joe. Did quite well, 8 catches for 81 yards. Thought he had some red zone looks as well watching that game. So what are your thoughts on Cedric Tillman? How much FAAB would you be spending for him?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about in that matchup, Cedric Tillman was the guy I was kind of most excited for just because, bigger bodied, but, large target on the outside for the Browns. And if you watch that, I'm not excited about Jerry Jeudy. And once again, he was proving it with the dropsies. And like I said, the contested catches just aren't his ideal thing. And I think that's where Tillman can help it. Yeah, I mean, a solid game with 12 targets, 8 for 81 as well. I'm also encouraged with Jameis Winston. I'm hoping Jameis Winston will be the starting quarterback going forward. Hopefully they won't go with Dorian Thompson-Robinson here, but I think it will be Jameis Winston moving forward. And if that's the case, we know that Winston just loves to throw the ball up and give his guy a chance. And I think that most likely Tillman should be the beneficiary of that. If you're pretty desperate at the wide receiver position, I'd definitely 5%, but I guess if you're more desperate, if you wanted to go over 5, you probably could.
Yeah, I mean, DTR kind of had a finger issue. They don't believe it could be long-term. We don't think it's long-term at the point of this episode's recording here. We don't know. But with Winston coming out, I think it could make some sense. I mean, he's only rostered in 2% of sleeper leagues, which kind of surprises me because there's a lot of dynasty leagues in sleeper. You would think this guy would still be on someone's practice squad, or taxi squad, but I guess not. So I think overall, I'm with you about 5%. I mean, I think he may be the guy I'm most interested in, right? I mean, he got 11 targets
100%.
compared to Judy's 6 and Elijah Moore's 6. I think Tillman's the guy I'm most interested in.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned sleeper, but I've got him rostered at 0.3% of ESPN leagues.
Yeah, so there you go. He's not very rostered at all. I think that's going to change quite considerably in the next few days here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with the injuries that keep piling up at the wide receiver position, and guys being disappointing week in and week out here, I definitely think he's intriguing.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So the next player we're going to be talking about is a homegrown favorite of yours, Joe. It's wide receiver Troy Franklin of Denver Broncos. Played on Thursday night, so it's been a while since we saw him. But, we heard recently Sean Payton say that he's going to be having the rookies play more and more snaps. Well, we saw that, and Troy Franklin obviously has the familiarity with Bo Nix. They played college together in Oregon. He did quite well. He had 6 targets, 5 catches for 50 yards. He has that big playability, Joe. He's a deep receiver. He can play the deep ball. What's your thoughts on Troy Franklin? I mean, I know you're a Broncos fan here, so I might get some bias, but how much FAAB are you going to go for him?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go crazy for him. I do think he's a solid ad and an interesting player. I don't think I'm not that quite at the same point where I'd be streaming him, but you did see, Sean Payton come out and say they wanted to use the young guys more. Him and Vele got a lot of work. Sutton didn't, he received 1 target and then it was a pass interference call. So it took that away. He didn't even come out of the game with a catch against the Saints. But the Broncos also didn't have to pass too much, but with the limited passing game, for him to get 6 targets was pretty impressive. So, I mean, I think it's a speculative ad, right? So I'd probably say 0 to 3%, but I do think he's kind of worth the stash at this point to see if, that college connection develops into something more.
Yeah, I think what you just said, you maybe didn't purposely do it, but by accident you said it. I think he's a great stash player. Right, where you're talking about, I think a stash is like around 1%, 2% of your FAAB. You're not talking about a lot, but he's a guy you're going to stash on your roster because he could develop and become a guy who you want to start in or really stream. At this point, I think he's a stash, not necessarily a guy I have to have. But he's a guy probably in priority. I'm putting him there. In the event I don't, I'm unable to get a guy like Cedric Tillman, right? If I can get a Troy Franklin, I'll put that waiver claim behind him as a plan B.
Yeah, I do think it's a solid plan. I mean, he's a guy that, has decent speed and everything like that. He can create after the catch as well. So I do think there, as he continues to evolve, there's room for him to grow within the offense.
So from one homer team to another, let's talk about the next player. It's going to be wide receiver Keon Coleman, the rookie. And boy, Joe, I got to tell you, I was really nervous about the pick, but he is showing that he's very explosive. He led the team in snaps, which I found was quite surprising. 29 routes runs, 7 targets, had 4 catches for 125 yards. Even had some opportunities to get in the end zone. They didn't call it a touchdown, but it was pretty close. So it seems like Coleman is getting more comfortable in this offense. And even with Amari Cooper there, although Amari Cooper only played 19 snaps, that could change. He might not be the alpha guy, but Coleman I think he may possibly succeed more now that you have an alpha in Cooper. What are your thoughts on Keon Coleman? How much FAAB you put on for him?
Yeah, I think, he's kind of in the similar boat to Troy Franklin. I'm probably sticking in I might be willing to go a little higher for Coleman just because with the Bills, you just don't know who's quite there. And, Josh Allen at quarterback, expect him to possibly have some bigger games as well. So probably still say, that 0 to 3% range. But this was a good game. And I was thinking the same thing. Like, I just wonder, as excited as people were for Cooper and his own fantasy production, going away from the Browns and coming to the Bills, if this also just helps unlock Keon Coleman, who he was clearly a guy that everyone was trying to target. They weren't worried about Mac Hollins beating them on the, outside, no offense. And then it's like Khalil Shakir and, Kincaid stopping those other 2 guys. But Coleman is the guy that you just can't let him beat you. But I feel like with the threat on the outside of Amari Cooper now, I feel like that definitely helps Coleman. And not only that, I think, having a veteran wide receiver like Cooper is also going to be able to teach Coleman some things, and then he's going to be able to better progress as the season goes here.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills' philosophy this year is, without Stephon Diggs, is everybody eats. But it seemed like people were starving recently. Now that Cooper's there, I actually think it's been helpful. It's actually opened up the offense for other people, and now they have to key in on Amari Cooper. And so as a result, these other guys are getting open. So I like it. I personally say 3 to 5% he's rostered in 52% of sleeper leagues, which actually was a lot higher than I thought. I didn't think he was going to be that highly rostered. So more than I anticipated. But nevertheless, I would say right now, I probably would go Tillman 1, Coleman 2, and Franklin 3 in that pecking order.
I think that's fair. And for what it's worth, he's 44.4% rostered in an ESPN league. So a little bit lower than sleeper. But I it's understandable he's around 50% roster just because he was one of the more higher touted rookies, and really people were looking at him as the possible number 1 on the Bills offense.
So the next player we're going to be talking about is a guy who actually didn't play in week 7, but due to some other situations going on with the team, you may want to reconsider adding this guy, and that's wide receiver Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. Right now, as of this recording, it's the belief that Brandon Ayuk has torn his ACL. We don't know that for sure, but it's looking more than likely he's going to miss a considerable amount of time, if not the entire year. We also saw Debo was dealing with some illness as well. Probably will be back next week, but you never know. So enter Jauan Jennings now, a guy who people were really excited about, currently rostered in 36% of sleeper leagues. He had a huge rush of people adding him, and then he dropped him because after that, once Debo was back, people didn't really care to have him. But now that Ayuk could be gone, this kind of opens up the door again to possibly get a guy like Jauan Jennings here, Joe. So what are your thoughts on Jauan Jennings? How much FAAB are you going to put down for him?
Yeah, I mean, really, Jennings, has played well, but he really needed, somebody like Ayuk or Debo to go down to open up a pathway for him. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, unfortunately, Ayuk goes down, and like you said, looking like he tore his ACL. So it's going to be next man up. The only thing it provides a little caution about Jennings is he also didn't play in this game on his own, right? Just because he's dealing with a hip injury. Not sure how serious that is, but I still think regardless, Jennings should be picked up. He sits at 45.7% roster in ESPN league, so a little bit higher than sleeper leagues that you mentioned. But they've got a great matchup week 8 against the Dallas Cowboys before their week 9 bye, and if Jennings plays, he should have a big game. So I'm probably, I think if you're once again maybe you have Ayuk, I mean I'd be spending possibly anywhere from 5 to 10% for him.
Yeah, I think 5 to 10% sounds accurate to me. I think that seems like a good amount, especially with the news of if Ayuk is definitely gone for the year. I mean, although Ayuk hasn't really done all that well to begin with this season, based on his holdout, we always get concerned about that. At least you and I talk about it and not having the reps, in training camp and in that practice time. So I think Jauan Jennings could benefit greatly from the extra time, the extra playing time.
Yeah, and some other guys played. Like Pearsall, people were excited to get him on the field. I mean, it was against the Chiefs.
I'm glad you mentioned Ricky Pearsall. I was going to mention him as well.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about Ricky Pearsall. So I know I stopped you in your tracks there. But, I got to tell you, I actually would want Ricky Pearsall more than I would Jauan Jennings. Here's why.
Yeah, please.
Started his first game with the 49ers. He led the team in snaps, 32 routes run, 5 targets. Obviously had 3 catches for 21 yards. So I'm not saying his debut was that great, but there is an opportunity for him to step in and get some playing time as a starter because of the injuries that are happening with the Niners. I don't want to miss this boat. I'm willing to spend up to 10% to get this guy, possibly even more.
Wow. I was going to say, I mean, I wouldn't be, if you're worried about picking up Jennings because of Pearsall, I wouldn't be worried about him. I didn't really see him anything that really impressed me. I mean, it was against the Chiefs. They are a tough team, played some tight man-to-man as well. But yeah,
he's a rookie, and this is the first time he played. He was shot. I mean, like he's just getting back. And look at Brian Robinson when that happened to him. He just, he wasn't, a bowling ball right from the beginning. He's kind of gotten better over time.
I mean, Robinson was shot in the leg. I mean, I feel like that impacted more than him getting shot in the upper body. But nonetheless, I think largely his opportunities though came because Debo was also hurt. He technically wasn't hurt. He had an illness. Like Debo's going to be back next week, and I think then the opportunities for Pearsall goes right down, and Jauan Jennings will still be there. But if something happens to Jennings, I mean that will open the door. I think I saw more out of Jacob Cohen, where if I'm going to take a flyer on somebody else in this offense, I'd rather.
Well, you've always liked Cohen over Pearsall. Anyways.
I know, and so far, I was more impressed with him. Talking about another rookie making his kind of a debut and getting opportunities, I was more impressed with him. They took him downfield shots to him, and he came up with them.
I get that, but at the end of the day, the Niners took Pearsall with a first-round pick. I know at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where they picked. I know you'll tell me that. It's how they perform. But there is an expectation that if it's an early draft pick, I feel that most teams try to give them that opportunity.
It is fair. I mean, Pearsall was on the field before Cohen was. But
Cohen only had 12 snaps. Mind you, he had 3 targets on the 8 routes he ran. So that's probably why you were more excited based on the limited action you saw of him.
Well, plus he just got the more exciting ones down the field. I mean, a lot of Pearsall's were just kind of short, quick little slants that he didn't really do too much with after the catch.
All right, and we've got tight end Hunter Henry, though. Okay, we've talked about in the past, but now that quarterback Drake May is the quarterback, he had 9 targets, 8 catches for 92 yards. The tight end landscape is a wasteland. He's only rostered in 29% of sleeper leagues. What are your thoughts on Hunter Henry, Joe?
Yeah, I like him as a pickup, especially, got the Jets coming up at home this upcoming week as well. Saw Frymouth have some pretty nice catches along with Darnell Washington. So tight ends were utilized in tonight's game for the Steelers against those Jets. And he's at 27.3% rostered in ESPN leagues. And boy, was Hunter Henry a great security blanket for Drake May. And we always talk about those young quarterbacks, Steve. Those tight ends are their best friend and the security blankets underneath, and there's quite a few check downs. So I think that could continue to progress here. And let's face it, I mean, this Patriots offense looks a heck of a lot better with Drake May back there as well.
Yeah, honestly, if you're in a tight end situation that is kind of desperate, which most likely more often than most teams are, I think this guy's definitely worth an ad. I'd say 5 to 10% if you really need, because I think you can start going forward. I mean, we talked about having a security, like you mentioned, with a security blanket of a tight end. I think he really has that, and he led the team in snaps. You don't really see that as far as the tight end goes. Had 35 routes run, which was close to Keyshawn Boutte. So he's definitely getting the majority of the opportunities there. So, I mean, I was excited about Pop Douglas. Actually, should have been excited about Hunter Henry. Back-to-back good weeks. These past 2 weeks with Drake May under center.
Yeah, back-to-back good weeks. And another thing I like is he's got the very last bye week. So while another tight end in your roster is probably going to have one up sooner than week 14, Patriots have that week 14 bye, and you can kind of ride them. But, it's last week of the regular season, so you'll need to figure that out. But at least, you got Hunter Henry lock and loaded in your lineup from now until week 14.
Before we go, Joe, is Chef Russ cooking?
Oh, and I mean, I tell you, Steve, I liked it for George Pickens that Russell Wilson was going to start, and he absolutely just lobbed it up to him and let that man go up and catch those one-on-ones. And got to say, he looked pretty good, which I thought he might with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought they would simplify things, and Arthur Smith could get the better of them. It was a shaky start, but Russ definitely figured it out.
Yeah, it definitely was shaky, but they allowed him to cook.
Booing at him.
What's that?
Had the crowd booing at him. Be close to a Dustin Field switch.
Yeah, at first, Tomlin, it was kind of a questionable call, but there's no question the passing offense was far better with Russell Wilson, which I think is what Tomlin was looking at. Okay percentage-wise, completion percentage-wise, but had 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, and a rushing touchdown, which I was surprised they did that. But, I mean...
especially you being a Najee owner, Steve. I thought they stole one from him.
I know. I was surprised, especially because like Collinsworth was saying on the broadcast, he injured his calf, right, pushing a sled. So it's kind of the same mechanism of kind of like, lunging forward for the touchdown. I don't know. I think didn't really get that call. But ultimately, I don't know, Joe. I mean, is he worth a pickup?
For now, I do. I think he definitely could be. I mean, the Jets defense, definitely looked like a shell of its former self. I mean, it's looking shaky, but hey, at this point, with bye weeks and honestly some quarterbacks, even if you were going ahead and got Patrick Mahomes this year, you got to be scrambling looking for a different quarterback if you don't have a decent backup. So yeah, I think Wilson could be a good pickup, especially because looking at their schedule, I mean, it's not that tough moving forward here. No,
it's not. So that does it for this episode. We talked about more. I think this is probably our biggest episode. Yeah, we talked about a handful of players past 5. Yeah. So you got a couple bonus players if you tuned in this week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.